My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay. What becomes of a society when it can't see its ruins? When the rotting mass of obsolete systems are kept alive, feeding on the rest as active decay. A body living, dying, and already dead. Just an animated corpse. Like the mindless body of JFK trying to put his head back together. An imperial Humpty Dumpty without the king's horses and men to aid him. We did a good job cleaning up after the early violence that got us here. But one need only look around to see we miss the rats and the weeds in the cities. Try as we might, we can't escape nature. Those which would weave through our cities, surviving and thriving in all the miraculous scars we call home. One such city is London, and should you find yourself there, you might happen upon the pigeon Stringfoot and rescue groups staring at the birds. To quote the BBC, not the cock, the news org, "Feral pigeons were made by humans, and now we detest them. How did things go so wrong?" Reportedly, the onlookers ranged from bemused to hostile, and while it's obvious, I think the most, why one would be confused at the idea of rescuing pigeons, why would you be hostile? And also, what the fuck is Stringfoot? So, our cities generate debris. Scraps of hair, fabric, and plastic shed as we and our machines move about. The tangled mass then forms into these spontaneous tourniquets for the pigeon. Thus, Stringfoot. In the aftermath of a dirty amputation of a healthy limb cruelly cut off by waste and byproducts, the pigeon is now free to get sick and die. Should you see a one-legged pigeon or those with crooked, swollen feet, you now know they are those who survived stubbornly. Why would preventing the avoidable pain and suffering and disease be met with hostility? You'd assume there's some logic to it. There must be. Perhaps pigeons are dirty and disease-ridden, imperfect victims who deserve their plight. Yet we made them. And in one study, zoonotic infection of humans by feral pigeons during the period of 1941 to 2004 resulted in only 13 deaths. Not quite the fear-inducing numbers we'd expect, especially when contrasted with something like COVID, which for some invoked rage and apathy when we attempted to deal with it. Don't rush off to suck a pigeon just yet, by the way. There still is, germs and bird flu at time of writing. Unless JFK's fail nephew declares virus is a myth and the illness the result of minorities or occultic spells. We're not saying pigeons and animals can't be disease vectors, but that the reason for the anger isn't rooted in such logic. Often people get philosophical or poetic and ideas end up feeling abstract, like dreams that just float in our collective mind we call culture. However, this isn't always true. The ideas eventually render themselves in the real world, material reality. They can spark revolutions, hate, or birth institutions and systems. Others become art, statues, and policies. If you look beyond the city pigeon, you'll see ideas everywhere. Adverts, shop windows, street signs, political posters, architecture, and more. The hard calcification of ideas caked onto reality like bird shit on a statue or storefront facade. We can even cake ideas on ideas. Often we don't even question them before they dry and harden. Today our buildings are lined with spikes, bumps, and slanted surfaces. Up high to stop the pigeon and down low to repel the human. Hostile architecture is an expensive and intentional design practice intended to make our cities worse for all of us. Just much, much worse for the homeless. The goal is to render them unlivable so that these homeless people are driven from view, repelled from the main streets of bright lights, relative safety, and small financial support, amputated from the rest of society, and driven from the organs of the body politic. Businesses, commerce, employment, far from the lifeblood of the flowing traffic of people, as if they were a tumor, to be deprived of resources and starved to death. And it might seem tempting to accept this, to break up the whole into pieces, into organs, to treat the workplace as a liver, the church as a heart, the mayoral offices as a brain. Yet the blood of the liver is the blood of the lungs. The boundaries are an abstraction. A worker leaves the office and drives in the flow of traffic, the lifeblood of a city. And so, those we amputate and attempt to discard are with us, as is the systems we build to manage us, expel them, and attempt to control the peaceful chaos of a society. The pursuit of productivity so that some of us can earn a living while others are denied it. It may all seem orderly, sensible, and intentional. That such is the natural, logical way, and that the world is not only inevitable, but alternatives are unimaginable. But we must reckon with the choices made by this society. There is a tendency or myth to think progress is linear and consistent. We simultaneously know it is not. When we view a historic timeline of empires falling, famines, disease, wars, dark ages, and more, we would be fools to think progress was linear. Setbacks occur, often avoidable ones conjured by oversights, obscured by our myths. Yet today, no one thinks such is possible until it's happening, and when it does, they don't want to question the myths and oversights that lead us here. Instead of exorcising those demons and moving forward, they perpetuate the systems that lead to the crisis, thus fueling it further, or should it end, making further crisis inevitable. When we discuss contemporary politics this way, we indulge in this delusion that progress is linear, consistent, guaranteed, and can emerge organically from this status quo without ever changing it materially. They say the arc of history bends towards justice. This is without acknowledging that such a conception of progress requires inaction on contemporary issues, and the trust in passive loyalty to institutions to save us in the future. It requires injustices to right. In the history, we see that it is rare or never that the world's power passively bends, that instead it must be bent, often at great expense to those who do it for daring to disrupt our passive loyalty to the systems. This is the sanitizing frame of resistance without resistors. To think of progress as something one waits for instead of the result of action. To ignore those who rebel or frack through the hardened mounds of bird shit to identify the statues glorifying racists, if only clarifying their image before tearing them down. The sanitizing is only done to protect the contemporary figures vying to become statues. We wait for progress, but knowing that when the old ideas die, they fossilize into stone. An issue created by this idea is one I refer to as the ethics of suffering. Not sure if someone has a better word for it, enlighten me in the comments. If we must just keep calm and carry on waiting for a better tomorrow, we accept both some people have to suffer, and that those who refuse to suffer and die in orderly fashion, but instead are too disruptive, are doing so indecently. There's a time and a place for taking a stand and for demanding change, but it's never here, and it's not now. This takes many forms, from tone policing protests, limiting the acts of resistance, and even demanding perfect victims. To the liberal, the emotions of the oppressed are not helpful if they call for immediacy, because the illusion of linear progress doesn't promise eventual progress materially, but it does resist progression by saying too much, too fast, too loud. This isn't allyship. The most you can do while forcing those you represent to suffer quietly is tokenize until you betray them. We see that now with liberals like Newsom in California and a general shift globally, this abandoning of the once loved darlings. Trans people, Mexicans, the homeless, Gaza, these issues were once nice until they were hated. Once the sacred idea of passivity and loyalty was violated by having demands for action instead of being resigned to passivity, they were rejected or sacrificed for political gain. Gain for the legitimacy, authority, and power to help. But yet, when they get that power, they can't help too much, because they require that captive support of the oppressed. Thus, you see supermajorities or whatever come and go without codification of right. So, the question and the fear lingers as a control lever. In this trolley problem, liberals aren't decision makers, and we can see that all the fascists are the ones deciding to kill more people. The liberals are the ones tying people to the tracks and maintaining the train to prevent its wheels getting clogged with bone. The victims are reduced to byproducts and effects in need of treatments as if they were just symptoms. As with pigeons, the logic isn't there to blame the victims. The poor are seen as crime. They are blamed for property values going down or the breakdown of society. Resistance to being ground in the cogs is part of the problem.
Yet if you follow the ideas to the cogs and look at the machinery, you find more problems. The poor are seen as leeches for being exploited too hard and suffering. Yet we are not equipped to see the landlord siphoning wealth from the community as leeches. Like the liberal who needs injustice, the landlord profits and benefits from housing not meeting demand. It drives up the pricing, and thus the powerful benefit from a status quo that creates and preserves homelessness. Were your efforts to free yourself are demonized, both the systems of oppression and the violent dismantling of your resistance will be valorized. Rebels are violent instability, but the bombs of the colonizer are always orderly and with the correct paperwork. The dominant forces can rain the chemical weapons on refugees, torture prisoners, and worse, but that's a cause for the courts. Trust the institutions, wait for justice. Yet if you act up, there is no waiting or tempering of rage from them. They act with the most brutal of swiftness to cut any threat to their power. And so, when a man is barely holding on to what remains of his family and life in a tent on the street, we don't care that a cop doing a sweep is ripping up irreplaceable photos. Because the arc of history bends towards justice after all. We shouldn't get involved. He has no rights to defend himself or his property. And if the cop starts to brutalize or even kill him in broad daylight, we must trust in the courts. Resisting his own murder would be justification to finish the job. This liberal passivity and status quo waiterism was rejected by some, by those who see the world we live in, by those who demanded action on the unconscionable reality we stare upon. At the time of writing, it's been a year of genocide in Gaza. For this, daring to care, those educating people on this were met with mockery and hatred by some liberals on TikTok or other places. Now wasn't the time, they said. Caring about genocides during an election year was too divisive an issue. Not now with so much at stake. Fascism is rising after all. Not while both sides are pro-genocide. Why ask the allegedly humanist side to have morals or principles instead of just accepting where we are? This has led figures like Judith Butler to come out and state that sacrificing outgroups for stability is already fascist logic. You can't resist fascism by appeasing genociders. And so this aversion to material reality has led liberals to now adopt a bigoted or hateful rhetoric of the right, to portray trans folk and others in the hope of reclaiming their power to serve the new status quo. Failing to recognize that this wasn't a victory for wedge issues and bigotry. This was a rejection of the status quo worship. You can't win by serving a system we all hurt under. People want change from wherever it comes from, or at the very least, they can't stomach defending this system from its own decay. The act of hiding the tourniquets that carve into them, lest people be worried or upset enough to do something. The liberals become the proof that progress is not linear as they capitulate to regressive ideology. The liberal collapse into prejudice is common. Ableism, classism, racism, and more are never far from use.
Said that if I have two dogs, if I had two retarded children, I'd be a hero. And yet the dogs, which are pretty much the same thing, what? They're sweet, they're loving, they're kind, but they don't mentally advance at all.
I'm going to throw my shoe at you for that.
As soon as the poor are deemed costly, they are rejected. Suddenly quips about trendy classism like turkey teeth become prevalent. Where we hate them for looking poor, we also mock them for performing affluence or covering up the evidence of their poverty. Struggle invalidated by terms like junkie, hobo, unwed single mother, spewed as bile until unacceptable, and then the rhetoric just gets subtle, seeing the right at water. To paraphrase, you start out screaming the N-word, then that hurts you. You can't say that, so you get abstract. Now you're talking economics, but the end product is black folk get hurt more than white. That's a member of a White House the left in the US have been reclaiming as good, by the way. And what he's describing is the weaponizing of economic ideas for ethnic cleansing. That you can still hurt and kill black people with policy instead of guns. With the ideas in our society, and the structures, and the infrastructure. The liberal, like the racist, like the landlord, has underlying ideas that they don't grapple with, ideas they hide by abstraction. The racist isn't willing to stop supporting white supremacy. It benefits them. The liberal is unwilling to alter a society that more or less serves them. So when you show them the real leeches behind the poverty of people, they lose their appetite for change. Because pigeons aren't hated for being diseased. Turkey teeth, FYI, is a term that might not be the same everywhere, or might not be dental related everywhere. Here, dentistry is more expensive, so here, the poor get judged for their teeth. This creates a drive for some to save, go into debt, or otherwise acquire veneers to hide the visible evidence of poverty. This is the attempt to perform respectable aesthetics, to self-sanitize in the effort not to be judged. You see a nervous disorder in birds where they erratically self-groom as a form of anxiety. In our society, such behavior is both encouraged and demonized. Veneers can make your teeth look better, but they only work if the tooth isn't rotten or infected. It is, however, a good method to cover up the history of neglect and harm, to create facades, like storefronts of our cities, hiding alleyways. Facades with plaque of bird shit, making it impossible to ever truly forget what our cities are. We create systems to manage the decay, facades to hide it, recycling centres that are inadequate for the volume of trash, public-private partnerships that are too costly to truly utilise, mountains of paperwork and means testing that exists to prevent people from ever using those services. We don't wish to feel responsible or to be moved to help. We self-conceptualize as good people. We create a system that appears to be good, and then when a weed weaves through the facade to remind us of reality, we reach for the solutions, aware of the harms. Pigeons used to be our darlings. They were pets, food, and tech, delivering letters and missiles. Fitting they'd land like veterans in the former Darling camp. A pigeon isn't one-to-one with a feral pigeon in the same way a veteran isn't one-to-one with the troops. In support of the troops because they are useful to empire, but it's fuck soldiers once they become veterans. We're in the new era of the pigeon, but its history with humanity is over 10,000 years long. We've domesticated them, bred them, traded them, ate them, used them, and abandoned them. They aren't a pest. Not any more than would be dogs and cats if we suddenly released all of them into the street tomorrow. They are a symbol of a negligent stewardship. The pigeon are siblings of the bleached coral, the desertification of fertile land, the Cancer Alley in Louisiana, or the various blights of monocrops, like the one instrumental in the genocide of my own people. Our systems do this. They create unintended byproducts, and now we can watch the debris of dead satellites while our hearts pump plastic-laced blood, unable to gaze upon the stars and dream, for the heavens are polluted and our imaginations restrained by passivity. Change can only resemble stagnation now, in a world of global projects built by accident, without a goal, and to the detriment of humanity. We unterraform our Earth with one of our inventions: capitalism. Multiple newborn babies have been found to have microplastics in their blood. Not too surprising given it's in their parents. The average testicle now has a reservoir of non-biodegradable plastics that will linger after their bones have rotten. Tomorrow's Ozymandias isn't statues, but the 1,000-year-old sperm of crystal plastic buried in a grave like a treasure chest. Is it any wonder that now, after generations of cheap plastic dolls, we are birthing the first generation of hybrid Funko Pop humans? To produce these techno-clots, we've triggered a Rube Goldberg machine that, if uninterrupted, will kill most life on this planet, if not all. This is the detritus of our society, wrapping around our limbs like tourniquets. This is cultural Stringfoot, amputating anything and everything in pursuit of profits. We very evidently have the power to change our society, but we only do so by accident while reacting to disasters and chasing short-term profits. When we look at this unintentionality and we look at the issues of our time, we see a very ominous future. Yesterday's led is today's AI-generated image. We see predictive policing, robot police, and other such sci-fi horrors being made today, developed in places like Palestine by the genocide and apartheid there, then sold to our forces here. Already we are making horrors, but our lack of ethics, clarity, and long-term focus shows us that we haven't even considered the consequences beyond them. Just some of us, those with power, know the consequences won't affect them. Unlike the pigeons, these feral AI pigeons of tomorrow will be plugged into big data producing hate speech and have the authority to enforce the law. We can't ignore the moral questions of our time. We can't wait for justice. The bending of the arc of history is not passive. It must be bent. The logic of fascists and genociders litters our public discourse. Those who are willing to sacrifice Gaza are now asking if they should sacrifice trans people to fascism too. You must recognize this is two sides of one idea, the humouring fascist logic and trying to find a tolerable outgroup for the public's rage aren't opposition to fascism, they are just lesser fascists. In the way cities and pigeons exist to affect one another, we must see how capitalism affects democracy. Free speech is a nice idea, but you're ineffectively opposing billionaires with media apparatuses. You don't have free speech, you have irrelevant speech. If you use your speech on relevant issues and speak out, you'll be silenced. And silenced isn't a mean word on Facebook or Twitter, like conservative comics will say on their Netflix special.
Is that online and in the media, conservative voices are being silenced. I said it on Joe Rogan. Conservative voices are being silenced. And I said it in my New York Times bestseller. Conservative voices are being silenced.
No, it's being brutalized by the system. It's losing your rights. The people are split into the aligned with power and the against it, along with the minorities. First I came for the socialists, but I did nothing because I wasn't one. Here, the cultural amputations of the trash byproducts manifest as fascist pogroms on the healthy parts of our community. The byproducts of capitalism are choking the pigeon of democracy, turning it feral. So we try to ignore it. We try not to be political. But many of us have no choice. Politics is done to us. We are rendered pigeons in our society so that all we can do is shit on it or die quietly. Remember, we made pigeons and we hate them for reminding us that they still exist past their usefulness. In the end, social causes are flattened to positions, debates, and bargaining chips. Child labour, genocide, poverty, they are just born of the system. The old gods like Jesus have been hollowed out in many places, and now capitalism wears its flesh, performs its rituals. The true God of our time has long cuckooed all of our myths. War crimes are good for the economy, thus they will continue. Stability over morality is the doctrine. Ignore the harm and watch the line go up. The beast we worship gets larger and larger, an egregore, a collective thought form summoned from our ideas, one we will have to grapple with eventually, but just not today. Thus, anti-rebellion sentiment slips in. The problem feels too big, too interconnected, too uncomfortable. You know people are dying, but you're not, and you're not ready to face any discomfort to try and help others. In this place, the suffering are burdened not just with the plight and the trauma, but with the task of motivating the apathetic, always without antagonizing their fragile egos.
I'm sorry. Are you going to behave yourself? Yes. Yes. What? Yes, sir. Look at me.
Lest they spiral out. They don't want solidarity to be hard. They don't want it to be materially consequential. They don't want to understand why things are the way they are. They want to symbolically gesture like Nancy Pelosi on black rights, post-George Floyd, while raising police budgets. In this, their ideology, their self-conception, and their myth preserve the status quo, which is militarized police and the systemic racism baked into the society. It neatly captures outrage and addresses it without meaningful capitulation through the use of ideology, similar to the use of state to find the path of least concessions for stability. We see homelessness, crumbling mental health, political instability, pollution, products no one wants yet can't live without, prisons, border crisis, police brutality, genocide, war, famine, all plastic rings in the detritus amid Stringfoot for humans. We intentionally have laid traps for our fellow man, and only intentional effort and clarity of sight can unset them. We hate pigeons because we made them, and they remind us of that by not dying quietly. We hate suffering because it compels us to do something.